to go live. We're live, but hold on. Before we go, let me just double check. I don't trust technology at all. I think we're live, but it hasn't yet shown on my thing. So I am going to trust that we are live. And then I'll double check in just 1 second. So, we are live because somebody's saying hello. Hi, Sierra, Foothills Gal, and it's always good speaking with you. So thank you for joining us. Velina, thank you so much. This is really exciting for me.
Thank you for having me today. It's such a great pleasure to finally be part of this great initiative that you've launched with really exciting guests.
Yeah, it's really exciting for me also. And you and I have had so much fun in the last few weeks talking about this and just talking about, we're like gossiping about geopolitics. Isn't that what we do?
Well, I thought that you would say we were assessing in a very solid way what is going on right now in the world. But okay, gossiping is probably also part of the, the whole process.
Well, there's got to be a lot of assumptions, right? So we're both trying to say where we are now, and we're dealing with a lot of imperfect information, of course. And then at the same time, we've got to project forward based upon that information that we possess and other things that we glean, and then project forward. So you and I have spent a lot of time discussing some stuff I'm really excited about because you're a systems view person and I'm an investor view person. But they have to coexist peacefully. So
absolutely, and I don't see any conflict between the two universes of people. So I'm quite convinced that systems analysts can also basically offer quite different perspective, but a useful one for those who are, I call them practitioners, the people with the skin in the game, who are on the ground, who are investing, who are actually doing business. So I think that both universes are coexisting in a perfect manner.
Yeah, well, and then I'm going to kick off and let you introduce yourself, and then we're going to kind of formally begin, I guess. But you've also been very helpful to me because very frequently I find people on Twitter and off Twitter, right? Because most of my world's off Twitter. But they believe that the dollar is this failing currency or that it's soon to fail, and everything's going to be either the euro or the yuan. And so even though you and I have to exist on certain assumptions and imperfect information because that's what we do, right? And then we try and make it as pristine as possible. And knock on, my desk is metal, but so knock on metal, so far so good. But you've been so helpful because many people don't understand why the euro trades with the volume and velocity it does sometimes. And you've been very helpful in helping me fight that battle with people so they can get a better system view. So this is going to be about that. So with that, Velina, would you be kind enough to introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. So Velina Tchakarova is my name. As you can hear, it's actually a Slavic name. Originally, I come from Bulgaria, but I'm an Austrian living in Austria, and basically I have 10 years of professional experience and 7 years of academic background in the field of foreign security and defense policy. And currently I'm the head of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy here in Vienna. So my work basically is derived from systems theory and from the systems approach, and includes research, consulting, and also publications on global and regional trends, on geopolitical, geoeconomic risks and scenarios for the public and the private sector. So yes, I apply systems thinking. Yes, I analyze global system processes and structures, by the way, as well. So anything that has to do with the global order, with the current shifts of change, I call them systemic changes. And you mentioned one of the key elements of the global system, which is the global finance and monetary system. And of course, I'm trying to make sense of all the most important socioeconomic systems relevant for the global affairs. And I'm really glad that I can kick off, so to say, this conversation, which is very, very relevant. I think is going to be interesting for for those who joined us today. But I have to warn that this is a very much systemic perspective for those who would be disappointed to and would be expecting more like micro perspective, actors-oriented perspective. I can assure you that Adam will be joined by other guests who will actually cover this micro perspective, which is as important as actually the systemic perspective. So I'm going to be the warm-up, so to say, to present some ideas, some directions in terms of probably the next 5-10 years where this world is heading. And then I hope that your other guests, Adam, will be joining you to cover important elements when it comes to regions and also when it comes to particular countries.
Yeah, you're part of a series, so I'm really excited about that. And the reason I decided that this series was going to be a lot of fun, and Tracy is next week, and then we're going to get a lot more granular in terms of the energy markets, in terms of sector rotations. The reason I thought this was important is, there's so much the appearance of a lot of world turbulence. And I suppose there is, but that doesn't constrain me from being an investor, right? So I always want to go, where the opportunities are. And about 3 years ago, I realized how much innovation was going downstream and how the world was bifurcating, and everybody was looking for high yield, complex innovation in the downstream developing world, within Africa, within India, which I know you and I have discussed a lot, and what's happening within Europe itself. So I think that would be a good place for us to begin. If we can talk a little bit about China, the intrusion into Europe, and then we'll take it from there.
Mm-hmm. That's a perfect starter. And I would like to draw the attention to 3 current systemic processes of greatest relevance. One is the systemic rivalry between the United States and China that was already taking place prior to COVID-19 crisis. Then the second phenomenon is the so-called, I call it bipolarization of the global affairs. And I will explain a little bit what I mean by that. And then we have also this kind of reconfiguration of global and regional alliances, partnerships, and thus also supply chains. Now, when it comes to the systemic rivalry, we all know that great powers rise and fall, and they are basically shaping each transitional period of global power shift and also its geographic concentration. Now, we are living in really exciting times because I call this period, let's have a comparison. If the great financial crisis was a global structural crisis, now we are facing a global systemic crisis and we don't know the exact outcome of it. Currently, the world is witnessing this profound transformation in the geopolitical arena of the international affairs, without any doubt. With the possible emergence of 2 systemic centers of power, the global order may transform from a unipolar to a bipolar world. That is my call. And I'm mostly contradicting the general idea of the experts, of the majority of experts, who are pointing to multipolarity. I don't see this multipolarity at the system level. I think that it's really going to be about 2 major power centers, the USA and China, and how they are going to shape their alliances, their partnerships, and also their supply chains. I think that this is going to be at the core. Now, it must also be emphasized that, like I shortly mentioned, these 2 countries, they were already involved actually in a competition, and this competition was encompassing various domains. So this is really important moment. It's not just about trade dispute or trade conflict or trade war. It's about much, much more. So it entails the domains from trade and economy to finances and monetary issues, and of course capital, flows, and then it goes to agriculture and high-tech technologies. So basically it encompasses all relevant socioeconomic systems right now. And of course it moves to the diplomacy, to the international and regional organizations, and we are going to touch upon it a little bit later. Now, what about bipolarization of global affairs? So the global system also reveals emerging network of regional actors with limited power projection capabilities, which seek to navigate the systemic rivalry between Washington and Beijing. So it's actually no longer just about make America great again. It's actually about make each country great again. So each country is trying to capitalize on by navigating through this systemic rivalry. And reconfiguration of global and regional alliances is an old chapter. We are going to discuss it a little bit later.
So so in this bifurcation of the world, where I do suspect also that it's going to be us and China competing for allies, I think we're going to see a lot of competition in Africa. I think that the U.S. has a more dominant position in India, although there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of volatility there.
Volatility,
yeah, but let's kind of run around the world a little bit in both what you're seeing, how our allies are going to be affected in Europe, and particularly also how that affects the supply chains, as they're kind of such a nexus into the Western world. So, Montenegro and all these other Belt and Road clients are coming closer and closer to Germany, to France, now to Italy. And those countries are very vulnerable because of their own debt.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm observing a very interesting phenomenon. In the famous words of Lord Palmerston, there are neither eternal allies nor perpetual enemies, only eternal and perpetual interests. And this specific maxim is now going to shape the upcoming decade, because we are going to observe actors, regional actors, that are going to be part of a certain regional ad hoc constellation based on shared geoeconomic interests, for instance, or based on certain geopolitical interests. But on the other side, the very same actors are going to be rivals in another arena or in another geographical area. Okay, so it's a very, very fluid geopolitical world right now. There are no fixed alliances or fixed partnership, and of course both power centers, the Washington and of course Beijing, they're going to seek for more security in terms of long-term commitments. So one of the key elements is going to be based basically on trust and on commitments, and if you like, even on loyalty, because this gives you certain security in your relationships. Now, you've mentioned some countries. All these main protagonists in the regional arena, such as Russia, such as India, Japan, Canada, the key European states, such as Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy. Then we move to Australia. We have a lot of regional actors right now that are in between, so to say. So they all are going to play the same game. They're going to play a balancing act between the United States and China without getting caught by the difficult choice of taking sides. This is going to be the game for the next years, until at some point they are going to be faced with a choice. They're going to have to decide. And we have already started observing this phenomenon. For instance, you mentioned Europe. Now, the USA has already started basically solidifying relations with certain European member states, with certain countries, and that is along, of course, certain geo-economic interests. And of course, on the other side, the big expectation that I have is that Germany and the United States are going to face tensions in their geo-economic relationship. That means that the relationship is going to get worse, no matter who the next US president is going to be. And that would mean that a certain fragmentation is going to happen along the peripheries of Europe based on US interests, but also, of course, based on the involvement of other regional actors such as Russia and Turkey. And with China entering the European continent, it's going to get messy.
Yeah, I expect the same thing. I do think it's going to get messy. As I've indicated to a lot of people, and something we're going to be discussing in 2 weeks with, because this is part of the series, right? So next week is, as I've said, is Tracy, who goes by Chigirl, who's awesome. And we'll be discussing more sector rotations, which is alternate scenarios. We know we have Trump in place right now. What's the alternative if we see Biden in office? How does that affect? Do we sell this? Do we buy that? How does that affect the energy markets, the energy stocks, if we start transitioning to different types of fuel and different energy, and we start becoming a consumer? And, we're already feeling the pinch of having the prices go so low that it's under market right now. So it's going to be very interesting to have that conversation. And then in the third week, we'll be discussing India. And it's not to present my own biases. It's why I selected India. So I'm not trying to persuade anybody I'm only trying to explain why my thesis has been that there's going to be a lot of, I think I tweeted out actually like 2 years ago, I said, 2020, I think I even said 2020, 2021, the world is going to have to learn a lot more about geopolitics. And that's because everything we know is fracturing. Whether that leads to war, I don't know. But it certainly leads to a situation where people are now having to decide, India's having to decide between the US and China, and at the same time preserving their economic and their economic capital with both countries. And I see Africa, and I have good friends throughout Africa, and they're definitely seeing a split. They're definitely already at the point that they have to choose. I was recently in Bolivia, and I was there with our analyst, and we were going from place to place. We went from the airports to the shipping yards to the mines. We observed the lithium mines and the bio rail. And they're now about a year past the point that they have to choose their allies. And that makes a big difference in terms of how the supply routes, the Belt and Road and the Silk Maritime route kind of take shape. So can you also discuss a little bit of the implications of the growing China Belt and Road initiative through Pakistan and then into Europe itself and into Africa?
Yes, it's very, very, like I said at the beginning, very exciting period for analysts who are interested in this kind of systemic processes, because we are seeing basically history evolving in front of our eyes. That's the first thing. Second, of course, it's a complexity of higher order. It's really, really hard to grasp the whole of it in a holistic way. It takes a lot of time to dive into all these processes. And you mentioned China's Belt and Road initiative, right? This was the Silk Road initiative originally. Then it was, renamed. Once it was introduced back in 2013, it was not really. It was more or less a nothing burger. It was discussed at every single, workshop or within every workshop framework or within experts, but no one was really making sense of it. It was more or less perceived as a marketing, as a big PR, so to say, PR event, right? I'm just giving you the background, what was being discussed during that time. Now, I was very skeptical right from the start, because I didn't see it from that perspective. To me, it was very interesting to understand whether it's holistic, whether it's actually something that entails a lot of components, or is it just a sum of many different initiatives, like the majority outlined it. Now, I think that this was in reality, and it turned out to be in reality, an idea or a vision, if you like, about a Chinese way of strategy in the long term. Now, what would that mean? It would mean that China presented its idea as to how to connect basically China with the rest of the world, how to create its own connectivity, its own transport, trade, and energy routes, basically from China to Europe and to Africa. That was at the beginning, and meanwhile it goes to Latin America. It basically is connecting all continents, is interested in from the north, the Arctic to the south. And that means that it's much more to it than just, a sum of 6 different, packages. And it's much more than just a sum of different regional projects. So the idea now is, if that's the Chinese vision as to how to present its own idea of connectivity, of globalization, as I call it, what will be the response by the transatlantic community, by the United States, respectively by its partners and allies? Do we have actually an alternative? And in this regard, I must say that right now, COVID-19 crisis has put a stop, which is to these projects, more or less, which is playing a sort of an advantage to us, to the transatlantic community, because we haven't come up with an alternative to it. On the opposite, the European continent is fragmented without a coherent idea in which direction it wants to go in the future when it comes to foreign security and defense policy. When it comes to allies, even its relationship with China is very ambiguous. United States has an idea which is currently based on, like I pointed out, this bilateralization of international relations. They want to deal with the partners and with the allies which are loyal to the US interests, which are basically trustworthy, and which are more or less ready to build long-term relations. That is why also this reconfiguration of global supply chains is going to probably take place within this kind of US-led networks, right? And then again, we have regional players in between, like I said, that are still in the phase of orientation. Are they going, on the one side, they see potential in participating in such tremendous few trillion worth connectivity projects such as the Belt and Road. On the other side, there are risks connected to these Belt and Road initiatives, and we know already from experience, it's about risks from indebtedness, from political pressure, to certain presence on the ground, to even unknown security risks in the future. I always ask the question, what if China says tomorrow we have to secure our investments on foreign soil, and we have to make sure that we have soldiers or private security companies on the ground that take care and guarantee the security of our investments?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's probably a conversation for a different day, but I'll give a little bit of my own insight into that as well. And for many people who know or don't know, within certain economic framework, I probably am an expert, I suppose, perhaps even more of a specialist, because I have investments that are completely impacted overseas by my positions on China. And what I think is their kind of eroding position a little bit. I think COVID has, and then I want to go on to some questions because I see some really cool questions, but I think COVID has created a new vulnerability even for the ruling regime right now within China. And that is that the elites were never really in favor of so much expansion so quickly. For example, Pakistan was very controversial for the elites. And just like the US has their elites and Europe has their elites, China is not different in that respect, right? So even though there's been a lot of turnover within dynasties and within family fortunes, there has been a nucleus that's managed to remain for quite some time, and they've hoarded a lot of assets, particularly in manufacturing. So all that manufacturing ground that you see has really been consolidated into just a couple of handfuls of people. So when China expanded into certain markets, their loans are opaque, right? Nobody can see what those contracts look like. We do know that China lends these countries money. We don't know what the terms for those loans are, and we don't know what's been collateralized. And even within those client countries, their own population does not know what has been pledged should there be any type of default. And they don't find out until there has been a default. So, for example, Sri Lanka just is very vulnerable to GDP shocks and to repaying the loans. And the loans themselves are opaque, and they had to give up a 99-year lease to China. They've done the same thing. So the countries that are the most vulnerable, and why I'm mentioning this, is Montenegro, which I'm sure you know better than I do. But within you have Djibouti, which is and Tajikistan. But let's just take a look at Djibouti, where China has said explicitly within their own speeches. So you're not going to see this in the U.S. media, but I have analysts that translate the speeches. So we have our own Rutgers team that we lease their bandwidth, and they've said pretty explicitly that they want to have 50,000 PLA Navy Marines stationed on Djibouti, and they want to use that as an expedition force. So once they've got that, they can go out and cause havoc, and they will have a very dominant Navy in about 20 years. It takes a long time to build up a Navy. Then it takes a long time to practice that Navy, and that takes war. Then you also have the Guadalajara port, which we were discussing, which is their route around the Malacca Strait. So the Malacca Strait is there's a lot of pirates along it, right? And it's very narrow, and the pirates just come up to the boat with a lot of explosives, and they say, "Look, we're going to mount your boat, or we're going to explode it. You've got a choice." So I do see some vulnerability in China right now as a consequence of COVID, where those countries that are already very vulnerable are now needing a bailout, right? So either they're going to get bailed out by the IMF and become a U.S. ally, hopefully, or China will, which has done a good job of infiltrating the banks and infiltrating their own, will make their own loans to those countries and grab some assets. So in Djibouti, it's about ports, and Tajikistan, and they're also installing a lot of clean coal plants in these places, so that there is their own energy supplies. So I do think the Belt and Road, however, is vulnerable right now. So it's interesting that we're bifurcating now, because you were talking about this trend 2 years ago, and now we're at a time. Now we're at a time where the world has to make their allies, because everybody needs to get bailed out, or else they've got to close up. They've got to foreclose on whatever assets they pledged to China, or they've got to allow kind of American antagonism. And nobody wants to see American antagonism in Africa. Nobody wants America or China to be the low bidder for Africa, right? That's how wars happen. So, and then what do you see in South America as well? And I don't mean to interrupt you. What were you going to say, Velina?
Yes, I want to add 3 very important systemic issues linked to this discussion. Our listeners might be very interested in knowing that, or maybe they know it already. Now, the thing about this geostrategy that China has developed is, first and foremost, it still entails only and mostly one particular globalized network, which is the one of trade. But in order to create a real footprint, a global footprint, because let's be realistic, the only global power right now that has still the capabilities of global power projection and can control global supply chain is actually the United States. Now, in order for China to catch up, it needs more than just geostrategy based on Belt and Road. It needs more than that. It needs to enter the globalized finance and monetary networks, which is not the case. We still have a very limited share of of the Chinese currency is being traded globally, and that's certainly an indicator. And we have also the situation that China hasn't catched up with the most developed countries yet. So this kind of made in China 2025 strategies, programs, all these regional initiatives, all of these should flow into the idea of developing reliance, basically reducing reliance on foreign suppliers in the key industries, but also developing a kind of a self-reliance. And then you mentioned also another very important point, and that's my third key point, which is that Xi Jinping doesn't have a coherent leadership right now, especially following COVID-19. On the opposite, there is opposition within the Chinese state. It's not a coherent body. It's not a coherent functioning organ. And we should keep in mind that this kind of opposition, once things continue being messy, economy is not delivering, and so on and so forth. This economic contraction is going to last much longer, probably, than all prognosis and analysts are predicting. So basically, this is really the ground for at least my expectations that either he will go for a foreign policy success. He will need a foreign policy success somewhere in the world in order to solidify his leadership, or there will be a kind of a riot within the country in order to reshuffle the political system. So it's not wrong here, right?
So I see a lot of I see the riots, right, and it's very interesting. And again, I want to share, for full disclosure, I have bets against. And I've carried them for a long time against the yuan and against other assets in terms of agriculture. I expected the agriculture prices to go up. I thought, that there were going to be certain considerations because the country doesn't have their agriculture internally is horrible, right? So they're very reliant on U.S. because it's cheaper. Our pork here is cheaper. Our water here is cheaper. It's cleaner. They don't have to have extraordinary filtration. There's a lot of pollution over there. And the social credit system, which a lot of people have heard of, isn't just affecting people, right? Actually, people are one of the lowest consequences of it because that's the most easiest to coerce into place. What the social credit system also applies to businesses over there. And that means that businesses, both U.S. and foreign, have to comply with being obeisance to China and to what's called the four consciousnesses of Yi. So So when you're in China, you've got to like Z. You really have no choice, and you have to be obedient to it. But it also means that because China has so much pollution, and they need to clean it up internally, and they've been doing actually a good job of cleaning up internally, they can't have tens of thousands of people on site and on premises observing all the compliance with pollution environmental controls. So if they, within the social credit system, if they find out that there's been a failure, then the government will not lend money, or they'll lend it at extremely high rates. So they have their own ways of enforcing it for businesses. I see that China in November was already very vulnerable because they had a very large dollar-denominated debt, right? So a lot of their debt is held with is in American dollars, and there's a lot of American investment there. Yeah, and there's a lot of American investment there, and they've pledged their own collateral to service it, right? So it's a very complex banking relationship that we have, and a lot of funds, which I don't think are particularly sympathetic to the Chinese Communist Party, but they have to do business, right? They have to do business. There's several $1 trillion outstanding within China of dollar-denominated debt. And in December, we had, I'm going to say plus or minus $1 trillion that was coming due. So now what you've had is a consequence of China lowering the value of the yuan, right? So they've been through the exchanges, they can manipulate their currency. So everything that's been said about that is true. And I've tried to share the dual currency with people that they've got, an onshore and offshore currency. They lowered the price of their yuan to make their battle against tariffs and for a whole bunch of different reasons. But what that also did is it hurt their really vital export, big tech, big machinery export industries. So now all of a sudden, for the first time, China mainland, particularly in the Rust Belt, where you have this big manufacturing base, had to be competitive for the first time in 10 years. At the same time as that, you've had inflation is also hitting China. You can only handle inflation for so long, even no matter how much money you print. It's just never going to be enough when you've got 1.4 billion people, right? So, it's a complex situation. And when China changed their constitution to allow an extension of Xi's rule, they not only changed the constitution in kind of these superficial, let him stay for a long time, who cares, right? But they changed it significantly in that they changed the authority that the provincial governments have. And in doing so, you have a lot of riots on mainland for all the reasons that I described. Belt and Road is collapsing and people are not buying nuclear reactors, they're not buying they're not buying the high-speed rails. Not only can they no longer really afford it, but China, as you said, has still on the world stage has a very bad PR, right? So people are saying some PR wins about them now, but those are just kind of those aren't durable. Those are just propaganda, and they can only last a couple of weeks and then they go away. The bigger problems is that throughout the world, the dams that they've built, the high-speed railroads that they've built, are all falling apart. There's so much corruption within the state-owned industries within China that they're using faulty equipment. So you have a lot of volatility, in China. I do expect there to be some regime turnover. I don't think that Xi, unlike our own elites, I don't think Xi has resolve the impermanence of power, right? Which is what all the elites right now are trying to resolve, the age-old problem of the impermanence of power. I don't think he's fixed that. The elites were very upset. China has their own export-import bank. It's in arrears, so to speak, right? Their Belt and Road clients are defaulting, and at the same time, they've got their own trade bank, the AIES. And China had which was meant to be a vehicle for the elites to kind of funnel money out, right? That's what they want to do. And they've underfunded it significantly, which is a telltale sign. So I do see some volatility there. But to your point, I think the volatility is opportunistic for the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the thing, I have 2-3 systemic issues for you, which might be very interesting to know about and add to the picture. Now, the first thing is that if you look at the numbers, yes, of course, China has increased its share of the global output from 4% during the SARS crisis to 16% during the COVID-19 crisis. But then again, I checked the numbers also for the United States and Europe, and it turned out that USA kept its share of around quarter of the global output for the whole period, despite all the doom and gloom prognosis that its influence is actually shrinking. Then on the other side, it turned out that actors such as the European Union as a trade power, as a trade bloc, and then again the key European members have been actually squeezed, and new regional actors are entering the space, and that is why the share of middle powers is being squeezed. So basically, in reality, what had happened is that this rise of China didn't happen at the disadvantage of the United States for the last 10 years or so, or 15 years, but it actually happened at the disadvantage of other regional powers, such as the European Union and the key European powers. So in reality, also what is, at least my sense, is that there is no real recognition for this systemic process, is that the way the relationship with China is being right now negotiated is also based on the expectation that it's going to be a symmetrical one, but it's not going to be a symmetrical one in any sense. It's going to be a symmetrical relationship because of access to Chinese market, which is not going to be symmetrical. It's right now also not symmetric because of the issues that you've mentioned within the political system and within the environmental, investment flora, but also environmental. But this is another issue. I'm sure that Trace is going to touch upon the green energy and all this kind of energy issues. So we are here in Europe. We are even struggling to come up with an investment deal, with China. We are going to introduce investment screening. The COVID-19 crisis was a real eye-opener when it came to 5G network. Just prior to COVID-19, there was no real debate on the possibility of security issues arising from installing of 5G by Huawei. There was no real debate. The expectation was that this is just a private company. So I'm just giving you some of these issues the way they are. And it's really striking that we are still not very, very far away in these debates. I think that we should move on slowly but surely in terms of what comes next. And we are still stuck in actually debating something that has already been in place, more or less. And then one final thing, global supply chains haven't grown in the last 10 years. Global trade has been in a stagnation phase since 2012, 2013. Global economic slowdown has been a reality prior to COVID-19. We have been in a big deglobalization cycle, in fact, already prior to COVID-19. And of course, COVID-19, with this tremendous economic contraction, is going to add a major blow to the global system. But what I'm trying to tell you is that within this deglobalization cycle, each actor was striving for a bigger share because each actor, more or less, has been squeezed by the realities on the ground.
So I want to ask one question, and I want to answer some people's questions because I see some really interesting things here. So my only question, and it's one of those like lightning round type of things, is TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I know within Europe, I think it was called TPIP. Was that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you see that? Let's project forward into a Trump scenario. Let's project forward into a Biden scenario. Do you see TPP happening? And because that represents kind of 60% of the world's trade, how do you see that kind of changing the landscape?
Yeah. Well, in fact, this kind of systemic decoupling that we are talking about didn't start with Trump. It started with Obama, but Obama's administration had another vision, another idea of how to approach the problem of China's rise. So the idea of having this regional trade blocks, the one with Asian countries, and we know that this Asian shift also hasn't started with Trump, but was already being in place during the Obama administration. So key allies and partners in Asia, approaching them through this trade block, and then removing tariffs, increasing the volume of trade. And the TTIP basically would have been the biggest regional trade bloc at all because of the merger between the United States and the European Union. I think that under Democrats president, it is likely that this kind of institutional initiatives would be relaunched.
And I do want to be responsive. The thing that I would worry about in the theory of TPP is something I like a lot, right? But I don't like what was built into it. because, and this is a subject for a different day, but I don't like all the idea of the extrajudicial courts that have a sovereignty over our sovereignty. So I do worry about that, but I want to be responsive to people's questions. So I'm just going to kind of go in order in the living logos. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to be doing a Periscope about my COVID logs. I'm really excited about that. So I don't know if you can see this question. Can you see that on your screen?
No.
Okay. It asks, can Russia be weaned off China?
My favorite topic. I'm writing a book on the dragon bear right now. It's one of the most overlooked systemic phenomena at all. I've been calling for more attention on the possibility of a systemic coordination between China and Russia since 2015. Absolutely no topic during that time. I think that it's clearly an asymmetric relationship. The Russians are not stupid. They know that. They have to operate in a very volatile geopolitical environment. So they know very well that this is clearly an asymmetric relationship. And right now they are maximizing gains from this rapprochement with China. It's not a marriage of convenience. It's certainly not an alliance. And I called it the dragon bear to point to a systemic coordination encompassing various key fields of policies and measures, but also different geographic areas. Once China would become too big, too present in the direct sphere of influence of Russia, then it's over. Because Russia would never tolerate a Pax Sinica in its direct neighborhood, specifically Eurasia. These are basically the former Soviet space, starting from Central Asia, moving to Eastern Europe, and going to the Balkans and the Central European countries. So basically right now what I'm observing is it's, like I said, systemic coordination based on the shared geopolitical interest of creating troubles for the United States, basically influencing these US-led networks and partnerships and trying to somehow navigate in this transformational period.
Velina, you just read us a chapter. That was awesome. You read us a chapter. I want to now be responsive to the same person, which is kind of cool because they've asked so many cool questions. And Marco, I'm going to respond to your question in just a moment. I'm going to actually answer this one because it's something I think about quite often. I'm actually fairly familiar with it. Pakistan is in such a tricky spot right now. Khan was not the desired the one that China had hoped for, and I don't want to dwell too much on that part right now. But it's going to be tricky because the special economic zones have completely stalled out, and that's a real problem for Pakistan. And China has changed the terms of the funding. So it used to be China was funding these special economic zones in advance, so that Pakistan could secure the equipment, could secure the materials. I think that's on your side, Velina. So China was giving Pakistan money so they could secure the materials, secure the labor, secure the people, and because of all the corruption and fraud within Pakistan, which is just such a huge problem and such a big problem with the generals as well, China no longer funds in advance. Now they only fund once the project is actually commenced. Now that's a real problem because Pakistan just had to take a $2 billion bridge loan from China in anticipation of a $6 billion bailout from the IMF. So they received the bailout last year. Unfortunately, the bailout did not come with the terms that I would like to have seen, and I think the world honestly would like to have seen. The world wanted to see those Belt and Road contracts opened up. As I've described, they're opaque. And so I think most of the world was hoping that the IMF would lend money only on the condition that those contracts be opened up for interrogation. And they weren't. And I think that becomes a very bad thing because Western dollars don't want to chase the corruption, nor do they want to commit their own dollars to something that might either be victim to the Balakistan terrorists, or all the different terrorist groups that are out there, or to China's own kind of intrusions into the area. So hopefully that's responsive. This question's for you, Velina. Hasn't India, this is from Marco, so thank you so much for joining. Hasn't India already chosen to go against China?
Well, that's actually another, easy and difficult question. On the one side, China and India are natural rivals, as China and Russia are natural rivals, right? If we go back to the history, we know that they have been involved already in military conflict. They are involved in a kind of a regional security dilemma. And my expectation is that this decade that has just started is going to be clearly, at least in my eyes, an Indo-Pacific decade, with the USA, with China and India being the main protagonists. That also means that they're going to be involved in various emerging competitions. And because the previous question was related to Pakistan, whether Pakistan will cope, my answer will be it has to cope. It's a matter of survival, so it has to cope. And the same applies, of course, to India. And India is going to face this rise of China by creating regional alliances or entering regional alliances. This is going to be unprecedented in my eyes, because if we look back to the 20th century, India was the leader of the non-involvement movement. This time, India is not going to have this luxury of entering non-involvement movement. In order to face this competition, it has to make a clear choice. And I think that the choice points to creating a strategic partnership with the United States among these Anglo-Saxon networks. It's going to benefit from them. And that means, of course, clearly more tensions. So I expect that these tensions along the line of control between China and India, and also India, Pakistan, these kind of limited tensions, they're going to increase. We're going to get more intensity.
I'm going to keep on, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time, because I don't want to see this go over an hour if we can avoid it. But I think we're going to have to go over an hour because I see such good questions. So Charles asked, and thank you so much for being here, Charles. How does the economy, and this is something we discussed this weekend, so I'm interested in your quick response to it. How does the economy of surplus that we're seeing change dynamics between nations?
What surplus?
Well, actually, I'm going to reframe his question a little bit. I'm going to look at labor.
China, India, China, United States, Europe. These balances.
I'm going to reframe this question to one that I want to ask, right? But I'll put it in his mouth, or put it in his tweet. Is what happens to the middle class, and how does this kind of bifurcation of the world, where now we're going to see more intensive kind of competition, affect kind of what's going to happen within the middle classes of Europe, Americas, and throughout the world? So what do you think happens there?
What is going to happen is, on the one side, tremendous societal changes in some parts of the world, such as Asia, but also in Africa, and middle class is going to rise, which of course is going to put pressure on the political systems, because more people are going to be politically involved. On the other side, on that side of the Atlantic, United States, so developed economies, United States, European powers, this middle class, not that it's going to shrink dramatically, but it's going to actually witness a decline. And of course, with the decline of the middle class, with this growing gap between rich and poor, specifically in developed economies, we are going to witness a decline of, in political engagement, in political activity. For me, the middle class has been this most important pillar of the political systems of the 20th century, the way we we knew them. This is going to have major, and is already having major repercussions on basically for the political systems. But I use sarcasm by asking what kind of surplus, because I don't expect, to be honest, that we are going to have the luxury of any surplus. On the other side, is looking at this question from a systemic point of view. We should keep in mind that in this major triangle, United States, China, Europe, the only country that has actually an issue of deficit in trade relations is the United States. So one of the two actors has to face serious decline or decline in relations. It's going to be China or it's going to be Europe, right?
Okay, Velina, so these are like the bullet rounds, whatever they call those things. I don't know what they call those things, but where like I grill you, okay? And I see a lot of interesting questions here. But first I gotta say that Keith says that LOL thought you had a picture of Adam on the wall, which is really funny. I don't know if you can see it, but there's like my picture all the way on there. It does look like that, so that's really funny. I used to have the StreamYard thing, and I just switched it. I like the StreamYard better. I'm probably going to go back to it. So I see Mark here, and thank you so much. Bullet round, Velina, is I am seeing Germany cozy with Russia. Actually, I'm going to post it right here. Mark, thank you again. I am seeing Germany cozy with Russia, which is partnering with China.
Yes, that's actually one of these kind of systemic issues that refers to Europe. We have this really ambiguous relationship with both Russia and China. Now, the major question here is, of course, you have to look at the European Union and the European states as a trade bloc in which almost all countries have Germany as trade partner number one or number two. We have 70% of trade being conducted within this union. So I'm telling you this in order for you to understand how important Germany is. That means that if Germany decides to settle relations or to initiate a rapprochement with, for instance, Russia, this affects the whole bloc. This affects relations with third countries in Europe, okay? So we are right now observing a kind of a trend, which of course might change because the leadership in Germany is going to change in 2021. So that means, of course, that the Chancellor Merkel is going to exit politics, and that means a shift. But it is indeed reality. We have, in terms of relations with Russia, a Nord Stream 2.0 deal. That means more energy coming from Russia. This is something for Tracy. On the other side, when it comes to China, like I pointed out, Germany, of course, is going to seek probably a kind of a going back to business relations with China, is going certainly to try to shape a relationship which is based on business relations.
Okay, bullet round. Okay, so and you and I had such fantastic talks over the weekend, right? So I want to be responsive to a whole bunch of questions, and I also want to be respectful of your time, my time, and everybody's time for allowing us into their Twitter and into their Periscope. So Harry Dogwood asks, and thank you for being here, Harry. China rare earth monopoly is critical. What is your thinking on the kind of the world's battles for rare earth?
Well, I would only say that we've known that the whole time. We had reports coming from the European Commission already in 2013 about this dependence on China's rare metals. And then my question would be, have we done something against it? And the clear answer is no. So why should we wait for a COVID-19 pandemic situation to finally realize that we need a shift and that we need to cut certain dependencies, for instance, on rare metals? Like, for instance, if we are going to introduce a green transition in terms of energy, how is this supposed to happen without, while being still dependent on that kind of import of material? So it's clearly obviously something that has where our political elites had the time to invest more, I guess, to create more self-reliance.
So Saya, and thank you for being here, ask, hasn't bipartisan attitude in democracies been undermining diplomatic approach to global solutioning?
It's according to recent studies, the share of democracies globally is shrinking. That means that there are less countries that are in favor of a rules-based multilateral order. That means that less actors will be interested in investing in rules-based order. And that's why when I said that there's going to be a reconfiguration of supply chains, one of the key elements is going to be not just trust, but also rules-based network. That means commitment to rules of the game that have been developed over the decades, have been functioning. They create transparency, they create confidence, they create trust among the business partners, and this is all going to be very, very important, as detrimental to what actually China is right now initiating.
All right, so thank you very much. And Harry Suddick asked, and I think it would probably be best if this question is responded to next week. So Harry, please ask it again next week. Is can you discuss renminbi, or can you discuss CNI settled oil futures? And that's a question I'm going to ask for Tracy about the the impact of the currency settling for oil futures. So Jake Rose, if nations defer allegiance decisions as long as possible, what are the signals for taking sides?
Yeah, clear signals are, like I pointed out, one of the clear signals is the Dragon Bear. Currently, the Dragon Bear, China, Russia, what they're doing is they're introducing national currencies in their trade. They're trying to build regional formations, regional organizations, which, of course, isolate the United States, but also, to a great extent, European powers, and also other allies of the United States. Then we are looking for regional integration blocks. You've mentioned some of them, like anything that has to do with organizing regional trade within a bloc, like the regional comprehensive economic partnership, which is covering the same countries in Asia that the United States wanted to approach through the TPP. This is what China did automatically following the introduction of the TPP. The very same thing with the economic corridor in Pakistan, with a deal of 400 billion, if I'm not wrong, with Iran. This kind of signals where we clearly see a long-term engagement, which is based on commitments in several areas. It has to be very comprehensive.
So thank you. And Party Through It One had a lot of questions, and unfortunately, they all look so interesting. But the one that really caught me was when they said tofu buildings, because I know China, and that's kind of like for those people who know, tofu buildings, tofu schools, and the tofu high-speed rails sounds like it might be something derogatory, and it's not. It's just the truth. It's what everybody calls them. Their stuff just falls apart. There's just so much corruption, and there's just no observation of the quality or the tools. The tools are all counterfeit. Even the glass that they supply to the U.S. And the cement, they cheat on the grades. They'll only cheat with it. But yeah, tofu buildings is exactly correct. Well known that a lot of the people who live in the provincials and live deep in the mainland refuse to take the high-speed rails. Living Logos asked, if Z is unseated, how destabilizing would that be on the global stage? What do you think? Let me see if I can put this right. Here it is. So I'll repeat it. What happens if Living Logos, and thank you for being here again, asked if Z is unseated, how destabilizing would that be on the global stage?
Well, it depends. One of the key elements is, of course, what which parts of the opposition would take, would take the control, right? Because there is no secret that there are still oppositional elements within China, specifically in southern provinces that have connections to the United States, to business in the United States. We know that this kind of chimerical phenomenon has been built up in decades. It took a lot of effort, investment, time, and so on and so forth to build up this relationship. So these elements, they're still hoping for, for kind of a new phase in the US-China relations. Then again, on the Democrats candidate, probably there will be this institutional approach towards China, but on the other side, probably there will be backup channels where they are going to try to engage certain elements of the political elite within China in order to stabilize the relationship. So nothing is just black and white, of course, and this is a very hypothetical scenario, but I'm expecting that once, if that happens, the major goal would be to go back to the previous stage of the bilateral relation between the United States and China.
I'll respond to that as well. I think that the only way that China can win right now, its own public relations battles, which it's just losing all of them because of the defaulting of their clients and because of the shoddy workmanship. There's just so many things that have gone wrong there. Is the only way they can restore some part of their prestige, which has just been totally lost, is by displacing the current small party. And I think immediately it would be a threat to the U.S. because it would be showing as such a positive move forward. I would, it's going to be interesting. So, Abatan, thank you. He says namaste and Hare Krishna. So thank you very much for being here. We're now getting this question, so I want to be responsive to him quickly. How much of U.S. dollar reserves that China accumulated is going to be an issue?
I don't think that it's an issue at all. I don't understand this kind of discussion because we all know that the greatest holder of U.S. reserves is actually not China, but we know who the greatest, holder is, right? It's the Federal Reserve. So I don't see a situation, I don't see a scenario that China would start selling of this US dollar reserves, because this is a hedge for them, and they need this kind of security guarantee, if you like, in cases of kind of volatility in their currency, which they have been facing over and over again.
Okay, so I want to just ask, there's one last question, so I want to be responsive to it. It's from Patricide, so thank you so much for being here. Who is going to win the battle for South America metals? The U.S.? And I would include within that, actually, what their question was, who's going to win the battle for South America, their metals, USA or China? But I would also include with that lumber, the battle, to carve through the Amazon, and so many other things that are, well, China is an extraction economy, where they're going into places and kind of building for their own, where they're basically intruding into countries and then intubating the businesses, the indigenous businesses within them, and upsetting the trade balances. For example, Bolivia, their big trading partner used to be Brazil, and now it's China. So again, their question is, who's going to win the battle for South America? Agriculture, metals, USA or China?
Mm-hmm. Let me remind you that Brazil, because you gave the example with Brazil, was and is still part of the BRICS, which is one of the regional formations led by China. And currently they have leadership in Brazil, which is very much pro-American and is very much actually against Chinese policies, Chinese measures. So I think that first and foremost, we cannot generalize South America as a whole continent. It's going to be, once again, a bifurcation where we're going to observe deeper relations with the one or with the other actor, depending on the political elite. It's first and foremost always about the local political elites, how they want to capitalize on the current situation, and how they actually, where they see advantages. And the perfect example is probably Venezuela, right? Venezuela is right now causing up to both China and Russia. So it's clearly a situation in which they know that without this political backing by the dragon bear, the political elite cannot survive.
Now, what is your familiar, just out of curiosity, what is your familiarity with the battles within Colombia, Ecuador, and is that synthesized into your system, or are you letting go right now of forensics on those particular countries?
Like I said right from the beginning, I don't have this actor-based approach that I'm looking at a particular country. But certainly my expectation would be that depending on the political elite on the ground, there's going to be maximization of their own gains. Like I said, each country for itself. And depending also on regional realities. I mean, South America, Africa, these are parts of the world which are still very much unexplored in terms of what comes next within the framework of the fourth industrial revolution, right? So it's going to be really a competition, not just over ideas, but also over hearts and minds.
So we've gone on for 1 hour and 10 minutes. So thank you, everybody. And let me just give a bit of a preview to next week, and that explains this one. And next week and the week after is we're starting off kind of with a geopolitical landscape, right? We want the topography of the world. And once we've established that, which I think, Velina, you've been awesome. You've been really good. So now we've established kind of the topography of the world without having to go into kind of postmortems on each of the recent battles, Doklam and a whole bunch of others, and how they play out. We're looking at kind of the whole board of risk, right? And in our next one, which is next week, I'm so excited with Tracy, who's a total expert as well on energy, on the energy markets. And I think that's a really important one because now we're beginning to drill down. We've gone from kind of the board of risk. Now we're going down to how do we make money? We've got the board of risk in front of us. Now, how do we play the game to win? Because whatever the future is, we want to make sure that we're on the winning side of the trade, right? No matter what, we're investing in our finances. And if we're not investing our finances, we're investing our own kind of emotional well-being into kind of what the future is. And this is all a part of it. So it's very exciting. So next week we'll be with Tracy. Tracy will be discussing the energy markets and really in depth into Africa, So I'm really excited about that. And I have a lot of questions for her about, Nigeria and a whole bunch of other types of things. And then the week after that is I'll be discussing it's going to be great, the public and private markets in India. So I look at India, I look at the battle of the world right now as also a battle for downstream innovation as well. Because in the US, innovation has become so astronomically expensive, and innovation is the only thing that creates jobs, right? It is what it is. We need new Teslas, we need Space Force because we need jobs. So the world right now is battling for high yield, low cost, but highly complex innovation. So the world right now is fighting for where you're going to get that innovation from, which is why India has become such a crucial spot. Nigeria, parts of Africa look like they're also going to be extremely competitive because they're graduating just a lot of good students. They've also got a lot of natural resources, and there's also the opportunity for a lot of labor arbitrage. Labor is too expensive in the U.S. Labor is much too expensive. China has the same problems with the cost of labor. Their labor has actually become very expensive. Part of their Belt and Road initiative is they need cheap labor, right? So where are we going? So the world, and what Velina has been saying, one of the things the world is fighting for right now is not only where we're going to get the highly complex, big team type of innovation from that's going to create the new jobs, but also all the issues on its periphery. So the week after that is going to be the private and public markets, the startups that I've invested in India and why I've invested in them, and they're in the defense industry. And I'll explain those to everybody as much as I can, along with the venture capitalists and who's got a lot of money in the private markets over there, and we'll discuss that. And then somebody from a family office who's invested in the public markets within India. And that's not to promote India, as much as it is just to give people familiarity, because part of our thesis and part of what Velina said is there's going to be a lot of activity outside of America as well. So for the last, I'm very bullish on the US markets. I think they're going to skyrocket. I think everything is great. I think we also have to have a good understanding of why they're great, what's happening outside the world, and where can we also have alternative investments outside of the US, because I think that now more than ever becomes a key part of our wealth, retaining wealth and generational wealth, and the acquisition of wealth is going to require kind of more comprehensive outlook than we've had to have over the last 20 years. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. We ran over time, and thank you so much, Velina. We finally got to have this talk. It's so fun.
It was a really, really big pleasure being part of this incredible conversation. We received such interesting questions. I want to thank everyone who participated also in my poll on global supply chains. The majority of the voters actually point to complete systemic decoupling between the United States and China. This is my scenario under second term of Trump as well. And the rest also, another big part, another big group actually voted for partial reconfiguration away from China, which would probably be the scenario under a Democrat's President Joe Biden. So actually both scenarios are realistic depending on who is going to be elected. And I really want to thank everyone for staying with us. If you want to engage with me, if you want to ask further questions, feel free to write me on Twitter or on my webpage. Everything is free, is available. And I really thank you, Adam, for this opportunity to discuss with you for more than an hour these really interesting issues.
Thank you. And I'll, in closing, I'll include, and we should have discussed it more, and it's my bad, is your website. And I was pestering you so much to kind of make it perfect, and now you've made it perfect, and I didn't tell everybody to go there, so please go to her website. She's got so much good content. And you just wrote a book. Did you just write a book? You just wrote a paper.
It's just a small, it's a kind of a small handbook for those who would be more, interested in, finding out more about this kind of global system concept that I've developed over the last 10 years. Why I was much earlier with my calls on the systemic rivalry, with my call on the Dragon Bear, like I said, 2014, 2015, and now I'm making the on your life Periscope. I am making the call that this decade is going to be an Indo-Pacific decade with a major competition between United States, China, and India, and of course, all the regional networks surrounding this kind of epicenter, geo-economic and geopolitical. This is going to be really, exciting, depending on the point of view, of course.
Thank you so much for being here. I see Jen just said bravo, so thank you so much, Jen, for being here as well. Everybody, thank you so much for your time and allowing us into your Twitter feed or Periscope feed. And I hope we were very good and enjoyable guests. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thank you.